1, 2, 3.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Alt-Baking Bootcamp. I'm Jenny Dorsey, chef, writer, and the founder of Studio Atao.
And I'm Mia Rigdon, nutritionist, trained chef, and the founder of Rasa.
Today we are doing something a little different. We saw that everyone really liked the paleo bread recipe, so we're doing savory again, and we're doing a gluten-free, dairy-free scone with some prosciutto and chive and sesame seeds.
Yum, I love it. So before we dive into the recipe, we are going to taste test a traditional scone that we bought at a local coffee shop. What I look for in a scone is something that's really dense and crumbly.
I like it when they're flaky and feel like it kind of falls apart in my mouth. I think for a scone, you definitely want a nice contrast between crust and inside, so you get a little bit of that crunch. And I mean, I personally like scones with stuff in it, a variety of things in it, but there's nothing wrong with a plain scone.
So a scone can be just a vehicle for all of these other ingredients, and what you add in there not only adds flavor and texture, but can also add a lot of nutrition. So I'm excited to get into this recipe because we've got some good nutrient-dense add-ons.
All right, well now that we got our taste test out of the way, let's get started on our scone. What I also really love about this recipe is that it's very easy and it does not dirty almost any dishes. Really, everything goes into the food processor. So we start with our flour mixture, our add-ins, and then we're gonna put in cold coconut oil and pulse it to break it up into like even little pieces. So,
Twist it.
yeah, so now that I have the food processor in front of me, if you didn't know before, now you know, you need to take the lid off first, so that's that. All right, flours. So we got 2 cups of almond flour. I really like almond flour because it gives it like a nice kind of soft texture. And today we're using some quinoa flour as well. Quinoa flour I think is really great in this recipe because we usually associate quinoa in kind of savory preparations already, and obviously quinoa flour tastes like quinoa. So it gives it this like unique nuttiness that you don't really find in a lot of scone recipes right now, and it's really healthy for you.
Yeah, quinoa is a pseudo grain that's really high in protein. So especially in the mornings, you enjoy scones for breakfast most of the time. And so that's gonna give you a really important protein boost to help keep you going throughout the day.
If you don't find quinoa flour in a grocer near you, it's also really easy to make. You can just buy quinoa and grind it up in your blender. Of course, if you can't find quinoa flour, you don't want to grind up the quinoa that you get at the grocery store, you can also sub this 1-for-1 with a different flour such as oat flour. Now we're gonna add some coconut sugar. I know that this is a savory recipe, but as we've talked about before, kind of flavor layering that salty and sweet always makes baked goods more appetizing. And I think this gives it kind of a little bit of that molasses taste, which is also really good.
Yeah, and we've used coconut sugar in quite a few recipes here on Alt-Baking Bootcamp, and we love it because it has a lower glycemic index, which means that it's gonna spike your blood sugar levels less than cane sugar, for example. And it also has a little bit more of a robust flavor, similar to like brown sugar.
I'm also adding a little bit of salt here. Toasted sesame seeds. I really love toasted sesame seeds because they add this like kind of little bit of nuttiness that you can't quite place because it doesn't taste like well, it's not a nut, but there's like I don't know, there's something about it. You can't really discern it on your palate, but you always feel when it's missing. Just make sure you actually buy toasted ones or you toast them because I think raw sesame seeds are kind of sad. They don't really taste like anything.
But they also lend some really wonderful texture to the recipe, and sesame seeds are also super high in protein and have a lot of vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients that are just gonna add a little boost of nutrition to this scone.
And now some chives.
I love the green in here. I ask all of my clients to eat 20 different vegetables in a week, which sometimes people think that I'm crazy, but I count herbs and different types of lettuces. So chives are an herb that you might not use every single day, so it's just a great way to add a different veggie in the mix. And you know, each vegetable is gonna have a different nutrient profile, and so you're gonna be getting some benefits from this here. And always getting a little something green in the morning is, I say that's extra credit.
It's also super fragrant and nice, so you can use chives. There's no chives, you can do scallions or green onions. I have some baking powder over here. Nice spoon. And then prosciutto.
So I love that we're gonna be getting some additional protein in here from the prosciutto. I think for breakfast, it's important to get some protein, some fiber, some fat, and as I mentioned, the green bits are extra credit. But when buying any sort of cured meats, you wanna look for that nitrate-free label. The nitrates are a preservative that can be harmful to our health, and you wanna make sure to get the best quality that you can find. So organic, hormone-free, antibiotic-free, those things are important.
Of course, if you don't eat meat, there's plenty of great vegetarian options for you. You can do, you know, caramelized onions, you can do sauteed mushrooms, you can do asparagus. The world is your oyster. You can put whatever you want as fillings in here. All right, so I'm gonna put this back on. There we go, aha. And I'm just gonna give this a quick pulse so that we distribute all the base ingredients evenly, and then I'll add in our eggs as well as our cold coconut oil. I swear I've used this before.
The food processor is Jenny-proof.
All right, it's back. We're gonna just pulse a little bit. All right, great. Everything is now evenly distributed, and we'll go in with our.
So you don't want to pulse it too much, right? Because then, especially with the prosciutto, it might get a little too pulverized.
Yeah, you don't want like meat jelly in there.
Yeah. So just a quick pulse will do. And then that's the cold coconut oil, and then we're cracking in 2 whole eggs.
You want to use cold coconut oil here, not one that's like semi-melted or whatever, because you want it to distribute evenly as you're pulsing it. So in a usual scone, you have really cold butter and flour, and the idea is that the butter will release steam while it cooks, and it'll make those little flaky layers in a scone. Coconut oil, as we've talked about before, is pure fat, so there is no steam being released, so that's not really relevant here. And you also don't have that matrix structure from gluten. However, if you use melted coconut oil, it still kind of turns into this gloopy mess, which does affect your final, texture, because it's kind of dense and gross. Dense and gross is not what we want to hear. All right, that looks pretty good. You essentially want it to, I know how to use this, I swear. You essentially just want to come into a bowl.
Yeah, and you can tell that this sort of a dough is different from a muffin batter or a cookie dough. It's definitely thicker and a lot more dense.
So I like to just do this with my hands. This is pretty easy. Obviously, different people form their scones in different ways.
So what kind of a flour are you adding on there? Is that more quinoa flour?
This is a little bit more extra quinoa flour. I just want to kind of shape it so that it comes together. All right, so I'm just forming this into like a large kind of flat disc. And we'll do a little clear action here. Now that this is in a nice circle, I'm gonna cut this into, I think, 6 different scones.
These look great.
They smell nice. They smell like quinoa and chives.
They do.
All right, so we've preheated the oven to 400. It's important that you bake off the scones at a higher temperature. Essentially, you want to immediately get that like nice crust interior that we were talking about when we were tasting the scone, and then get it to the final height within the first few minutes as the rest of it kind of cooks out. So that's why you wouldn't cook it for like a longer period of time at 350.
All right.
So now it's been about 15 minutes at 400 degrees.
Ooh, they look great. They smell so good.
All right. So I'll let these cool like a minute or two before we break into them. Let them
It's always the
relax
worst
a little-
part,
I know,
waiting, right? Oh yeah, you can see in here already that the outer area is a lot firmer, and then inside it's like nice and doughy.
Soft.
That is so good. It definitely maintains the integrity of the scone. You can tell even just from the shape, and it's got that dense texture that we look for. It'd be wonderful in the morning with a cup of coffee, some scrambled eggs.
Ooh, yeah. You could make a little scone sandwich.
Ooh, like a
with some-
biscuit. These are delicious.
What I also love about this is that you can batch these scones up too. You can make a big batch, bake them off, and then let them cool and freeze them. So you can just keep them in a Ziploc and have them around for whenever you have a gathering next.
Just pop them in the oven.
And yeah, pop in the oven and reheat.
I'm gonna do that for sure. These are so good.
We made a savory scone today, but you can also make a sweet scone with basically the exact same kind of base ingredients. You would obviously swap out the prosciutto and the chive and the sesame seeds with something like raisins or chocolate chips. And you probably want to double the sugar so that there's a little bit more sweetness in the flour, but otherwise it's a really simple swap, and this is a really, really flexible recipe.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Alt-Baking Bootcamp. If there's other recipes that you'd like for Jenny and I to create, please comment below and let us know. We want to make you more healthy, delicious baked goods. And if you have questions about this particular recipe,
Comment, say what you like, tell us your different variations. We would
Yeah.
love to hear your thoughts and
Send
see
us
photos.
photos. Yeah.
Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.
thank you. I'm gonna keep eating this scone. I don't think any of these are getting to the freezer.
Yeah.